Hello and welcome to Carbon Removal Newsroom. I'm Ross Kenyon. I am the lead strategist at the Nori Carbon Removal Marketplace. Today I have with me three panelists, one of whom is a Nori colleague of mine, Alden Donnelly, the Director of Carbon Economics. Hey, Alden.
Hi, glad to be here.
Hi, welcome back. And Tito Jankowski, co-founder of Negative, which is a startup turning captured CO2 into jewelry. Tito,
Hey.
Hello. Oh, and also host of the Air Miners community, in case that is something that you are interested in. And Ugbad Kosar, Senior Policy Advisor at Carbon 180.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Ugbad. First time being on this new format. Happy to have you. And we picked a good one to have you on, given that so much of today's show is going to be about news coming out of DC or DC adjacent. Rhodium Group released a new report about the various economic impacts of direct air capture policy and the industry growing. There was also we hinted at this last week, but we did not cover it, primarily because I thought I would have you on this week to really give us the scoop on what is going on with the Growing Climate Solutions Act. And also another big thing that happened is that the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis just released a new report called Solving the Climate Crisis, the Congressional Action Plan for a Clean Energy Economy and a Healthy, Just, and Resilient America. Do reports need long subtitles? That is something that we will be digging into. What do you think, Ugbad? Is that required?
I think so, especially with the acronyms that they've got going on in the Hill. It's necessary.
This is why we need a strong podcast lobbyist organization to prevent that sort of thing, because it makes my job harder. But no, enough cheekiness. Why don't we dive right into this Rhodium Group report? What is going on with that, Ugbad?
Yes, so the Rhodium Group, they released another report on direct air capture. For those who maybe missed it, last year, they released a report that was talking about capturing leadership policies for the US to advance direct air capture technology, where they just identified specific policy mechanisms and levers that the federal government could pull to help scale up direct air capture. And in this report, they've deepened their dive into direct air capture by looking at potential employment and market opportunities that are associated with total scale up of direct air capture by 2050. So I personally was very surprised at a number of findings from this report. First off, taking a step back at direct air capture, you see that it really touches on a number of different sectors. You know, cement is involved, steel is involved, equipment manufacturing. And this is both, you know, in the jobs perspective and then also market opportunities. But what they found in the report is that on average, 1 megaton DAC plant would be able to create upwards of 3,000 jobs across the supply chain. Which is pretty astounding to me, at least. And so a big portion of these jobs are actually found in the construction phase, so really designing and constructing the plants. And then about 200, 300 of those would be dedicated to plant operations. And so that would be, you know, folks that maybe in the communities that this technology could potentially be deployed in, they would be able to have the opportunity to help with some of that operations and management of the plant. And then if you look at the full scale up by 2050, then we're seeing about 300,000 new jobs. And again, that's across construction, engineering, equipment manufacturing. John Larson, who was the lead author of the report, really emphasized the fact that a lot of these employment opportunities would be high wage, and really just wanted to drive that point home in particular. And then also, if you're looking at specific industries, you'll see that employment surges are seen in steel. So they showed that by 2050, the current steel manufacturing jobs would be close to doubled, which I don't know what your immediate thoughts are of that, but to me, that was pretty surprising. And then on the market opportunity side, there's going to be definitely a growing demand for the equipment. Currently, the equipment scene or the market is at about $64 billion USD a year. And with equipment being needed, such as like air contactors or, you know, industrial furnaces, turbines, that sort of thing, the market could be increased up to $259 billion. So all of that to say that in addition to a lot of the, you know, climate commitments that direct air capture can help us meet. And, with the IPCC report that's out, and, the idea of the role of negative emissions technologies and the role that they would play in future climate scenarios, I think it's also important to take a step back and figure out, all right, aside from climate, what are the other benefits of some of these technologies? And I think that this jobs piece in particular is really important. A lot of times when we look at things like, natural solutions like agriculture, forestry, it's really clear to see what the non-climate benefits would be like, whether it's looking at water quality or food, crop yields, or, biodiversity. But when you're looking at technology and you're trying to figure out, all right, what else can you get out of this technology, it's a little more unclear. And so I think that's a really important piece to remember, and something that I found particularly important. But I will mention that even though, direct air capture is very promising and commercial ready and something that could really help us meet these goals, I think we still need to take a step back and understand some of the social impacts and analyze some of this technology, not just through efficiency lens, but also through a justice and an equity lens. So I hope that kind of captured what the report touched on.
I think so. The big takeaway that I noticed and that I saw people latching onto was the potential for so many jobs to be created in fields or related fields to DAC. So I think that was good. I think DAC has had a little bit of a hard time competing on that co-benefits side, just because it doesn't seemingly have very many of them, except for potentially, this doesn't even count as a co-benefit perhaps, but permanence is the thing that people tend to stress, or people like the science fiction elements of it, but it isn't like soil health, which has so many advantages. I don't know. What do you, Tito or Alden, what do y'all think about this?
I mean, just at a high level, I'd love to see any report that's really focused on direct air capture in particular. I think is always exciting, and yeah, it was great to see this kind of stepping into this future scenario where we've scaled up to a bunch of these 1 million ton a year plants, and thinking about what are the because of that, what happens? And it turns out we get a lot more steel manufacturing jobs and industrial repair kind of jobs. I thought it was really, really interesting to read into it.
I'm confused about my reaction. I guess you're kind of used.
That's why I let you go last, Alden. You can confuse the story for us a little bit now. Muss it up.
First of all, I'm probably more enthusiastic about the direction I think the technology is evolving into as to maybe the current state of affairs. But when I look at the report, and maybe the problem is I haven't read too deep into it and have missed some of the answers to my questions, but the numbers seem kind of interesting or weird to me. So at one point it says they're forecasting that direct air capture will be developed to draw down between 0.7 and 2.2 billion tons of CO2 per year. Now, to put that in context, currently the 244 largest corporate emitters in the world, if we count their direct emissions and their customer emissions, so scope 1 and scope 3, discharge a total of about just under 32 billion tons a year. So at the first look, it looks to me that they're talking about direct air capture actually addressing or drawing down the equivalent of less than 10% of the existing scope 1 and scope 3 emissions from the 244 largest corporate sources, and that seems small to me. I don't know where they came up with the 2.2 billion sort of top end of the range of the role of direct air capture, it doesn't even cover 100% of the direct emissions of those 240 large emitter corporations. So what's in the background there? Are they assuming that almost all of that industry is shutting down, and that's why we only need 2.2 billion? I don't understand what the numbers assumptions, and I'd be interested in learning more. And then coming from the complete opposite direction, So I'm saying that looks like a small number. Comments I apply to sort of all new energy solutions and greenhouse gas reduction solutions, not just DAC. When I look at the employment forecast, those are very, very big numbers. So for us to finance the DAC industry that has those large upfront capital and labor costs, and then those large continuing labor costs, you are looking at, if those employment numbers are taken as a given, you are looking at long-term continuing costs of supplying the DAC service that are very, very high relative to the actual market value of the assets we're trying to preserve. So it looks to me like you're saying we're going to finance DAC, even though the cost of financing DAC might be 3 to 4 times the cost of writing off all of the oil refineries in the world and replacing them with electricity storage and renewables at current costs of those solutions. So it doesn't add from that side to me. And I don't want to sound like I'm not a DAC supporter. I think I am, but the numbers aren't in this particular report, don't add up to me. And it just might be that I've got more to learn, but the arithmetic isn't obviously working for me at first glance.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely hear a lot of your concerns, and I think it's important to remember 2 key aspects. One is, at least from me, I don't expect direct air capture to be a silver bullet or to be the one set carbon removal solution. I think if anything, it's complementary to a whole suite of different negative emissions technologies, and I think it'll just play a role to help us reach those emissions goals, but by no means is it the technology to help us reach emissions goals. So I think that's an important piece to include. And then secondly, in terms of like the finances and the numbers, I agree with you. I think as of right now, direct air capture is very expensive, and it's really dependent on federal support to not only bring the cost down for, however many dollars per ton it takes to capture CO2. And that will involve a lot of policy levers that need to be pulled today in order for it to become cost effective later on down the road. Does that kind of address some of the concerns that you were mentioning?
Well, I totally agree with what you just said, but if what we're saying is there's a huge new high wage labor pool we're going to generate, but to do it we need government subsidies, because the fact that this is a high wage and large labor generating solution means it will never be a cost effective solution. We got to come to terms with that, the chicken and egg situation. Just when it comes to looking at our history, including getting the SO2 reductions in the electricity sector under the acid rain program, in many of our successful precedents, in the end, it turned out to cost a lot less to reduce the emissions than we had all thought it would cost before we started. And in almost every precedent, the reason was one major explanation is the following, which is when we costed the issue before we started to work on it, we pretty much asked ourselves and came up with pretty good estimates of what it would cost to control, reduce, or offset emissions, given the assumption that we would be operating the high emitting plants to the end of their normal operating life. And when it came time to for industry to actually control, they found writing off and shutting down those plants early and replacing them with new solutions to supply the services and products they continue to supply ended up being cheaper than continuing to operate the existing asset base and offsetting the emissions. And I worry that the DAC business model is consistent with that old mistake of saying we're assuming everybody's going to continue to operate their existing plants through the end of their normal operating life, and that demand for DAC will derive from that starting place, when in fact shutting down the replants and replacing them with new sources of energy and building product might prove cheaper.
Well, any last comments about this? Obviously, links are in the show notes in case you would like to read this for yourself. Ugbad, you wrote a nice little piece for Carbon 180 summing it up. There was also a webinar y'all did with Rhodium about this report, which I imagine must be online. If it is, I'll put a link to it. But is there anything else that you think is worth saying about this for now?
No, I think it'll just be good for folks that are interested in learning a little bit more about the report and what are some of the thoughts from labor unions and folks from direct air capture plants themselves. I think it's really important to check out the webinar and listen into the discussion, because I found it to be very, very enlightening, and I think it helped put a lot of this into context.
Definitely, me too. And also, not a secret, but not a secret, is we have a Rhodium Group Reversing Climate Change episode coming soon. So if you care about this, stay tuned. There will be more to discuss. All right. Well, this next topic, Ugbad, I'm going to lean on you again for this. The Growing Climate Solutions Act. It had a full committee hearing. What exactly that is and what happens now, I imagine, is puzzling for many listeners. So what happened and where's it going next?
Yeah, definitely. So just to reiterate, the Growing Climate Solutions Act is a bill that would create programs at the USDA to support emissions reductions and carbon sequestration in the agricultural and the forestry sectors. It'd be providing technical assistance and organizational infrastructure to help farmers, ranchers, and foresters participate in a voluntary carbon market as they adopt practices to help them reduce emissions and sequester carbon in the soil. So there was a full committee hearing last week on this bill. And I think it's important to note, first off, that the fact that there was a full committee hearing to begin with is a pretty big deal, given how overwhelmed the Hill has been with so many other things that are going on right now. So the fact that Senator Stabenow was able to have this committee hearing, I think, is a signal to just how big this bill is going to be. That's completely just my opinion, though. But pretty much what happened was Senator Stabenow and Chairman Roberts were opening up the hearing with some sweeping support and statements of, the importance of this bill, how it's going to help give farmers long-term security, really highlighting the importance of things like accurate data and carbon sequestration and accounting, carbon sequestration in soils in particular, and then just really highlighting the important role that the USDA can play in all of this. They also called on a number of witnesses. There was 4 in particular. And my takeaway from this hearing was there was support throughout the hearing from pretty much everyone that was sitting on there. Of course, there were questions and concerns that were raised, but given the fact that all 4 witnesses seemed to really support this bill, and the statements from a lot of the senators that were present were also very much in favor of the bill, I think is a signal to how important and how bipartisan this bill is. Just to highlight a couple things, we had Brent Bible, who's an Indiana corn and soybean farmer, and also the farm advisor for the Environmental Defense Fund. He testified in support of the bill, and he argued that, we need Congress to step in and provide policies that incentivize further adoptions, and really refer to the need for federal policy to help encourage, widespread adoption of sustainable farming practices that can help lead to soil health and air quality and that sort of thing. There was Zippy Duval, who's the president of the American Farm Bureau Federation, also praised the bill and the idea of creating this certification program that would allow the USDA to certify third-party carbon credits. And he argued that it would make it easier for farmers to participate in the larger carbon markets. We also, the president of the National Farmers Union, again, also supported the bill and argued that it would lend legitimacy, were his words, to carbon markets. And this would allow family farmers and ranchers to engage in this market and the market opportunities that are offered by or through carbon sequestration. And then he did advocate for further policies, so including things like carbon sequestration tax credit or some sort of like carbon bank at USDA to allow federal government to serve as yet another buyer of some of these offsets. And then lastly, we had the president of Truterra, which is a division of Land O'Lakes Corporation, and he described the bill as an important step to developing, these viable carbon markets that will, advance the potential for agriculture and forestry sectors to reduce sequestered GHGs while also providing new resources of revenue for farmers and ranchers. So just taking a step back, I think that it was a very positive hearing, and I think that there was pretty much support on both sides of the aisle, both reflecting in the witnesses that were there and the comments and the questions that senators had. And I think it's important to notice that, one, the House is going to be introducing a counterpart, and that'll probably happen very likely. That will be led, I believe, by Representative Spanberger and Representative Bacon. And then also, this is completely my take on this, I suspect that there will probably be a fast pathway into signing this into law. And I just think it really fits this niche of, having bipartisan support to begin with, addressing farmers that, many people care about and are trying to support during these times. And just the conversation around this topic and the interest that we're seeing and how charged, folks on the Hill are about this, I think it has a really good chance of moving forward.
I have thoughts, Alden. I know you have thoughts. Without going full Nori on this, I would love to hear your take.
Try not to go full Nori. And last time we talked a bit about this, I said the following, and I mean it sincerely. If the bill, with its current words, no changes, is the only way to get it passed into law, then yes, go for it, thumbs up. I perceive, and I'm going to say I because I'm not sure that it's right for me to attribute this view to my other Nori partners. I perceive some of the detailed outcomes that are outlined in the existing bill might not be completely informed. I won't say ill-informed. They're ill-informed. But the good news is, as I read the bill, it creates a window of a year or more for experts to really dive in, look at the market, and perfect their concepts of what the services USDA would deliver. And I think that window is really, really important for there to be a little more examination of what's really needed here. And maybe I'll bother you with two examples. There seems to be a perception underlying the wording of the bill that there's a shortage of qualified carbon offset verifiers in the marketplace right now. And in the reality is that the American National Standards Institute certifies offset credit verifiers to a very high standard. I'm of the view that every organization that has been certified by ANSI is very, very capable. And at this time, there are only 13 certified in good standing ANSI verifiers, and there are 23 major U.S. companies with large payrolls who've let their ANSI certification drop. And it's not because they're bad guys or anything like that. It's because there hasn't been sufficient demand for their services to bear the continuing costs of maintaining their certification. So I'm not sure I see a shortage of qualified verifiers as an issue. There's a lot about how verification might be done and how data standards might be set that would massively reduce the cost of verification, which is a barrier to getting these markets rolling. So I think there is a huge opportunity for the USDA pursuant to this bill to make contributions that would be highly valued, but I'm not 100% sure though that I agree with the prescriptions as to what's needed in the bill. But the good news is I think the bill has embedded in it a window to work this stuff through and get it right. So that's all really good news in general, and I don't want to sound like I'm dissing the bill in that regard. The other little caution I would throw out there is it does say in the bill that they might certify or approve protocols and carbon credit creation mechanisms. And certainly NORI is a competitor in that market, so that would put us under the umbrella of that certification or approval process, and I'm okay with that. But the reality is, if you take one class of projects and look at how carbon credits are currently created, how the protocols operate in, say, 4 existing U.S. offset markets, Vera, ACR, CAR, and CARB. The CARB last market being administered by the state of California. Those protocols differ in substantial ways for otherwise similar projects. So this is a proposal, however unintentionally perhaps, that the USDA steps in and, to complete that commitment that's in the bill, they'd have to say, California, we don't approve your approach because Vera's approach is right. Vera, we don't approve your approach over here because CAR's approach is right. And California has already agreed not to agree with Vera's approach or CAR's approach. And does the USDA really want to say, we're the body that steps in and says which certification body of the existing bodies out there is right? I'm not sure the USDA wants to go there. I think there's a lot of, again, data standard guidance and work the USDA can do that is going to be really, really highly valued, but crossing the line into actually saying yes to this protocol and no to that protocol, given the prior existence of a lot of protocols and who the certification bodies are that are behind those protocols, I think that could be a real mess that the USDA does not need to step into.
Very interesting. I hadn't heard that take just yet. I have an even more basic question that maybe you can help me with. For creating policy like this, why bother creating market mechanisms, especially voluntary ones? Why not do something more like reform policy so that crop insurance and or various types of tax credits or other more conventional elements of policy, why not focus on those as a way to get people to move rather than creating something that might be a more complex or confusing like markets can be?
My reaction to, oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead, please.
My reaction to that is that's a really good question. And that also leads me to just another thing that I did comment on last time this topic came up, which is historically, of course, all of our food and fiber producers directly or indirectly depend on government subsidies, indirect subsidies coming through crop insurance. Most food and fiber producers can't survive without them, but would love to imagine a future in which they weren't so dependent on government subsidies. So whenever it comes to these kinds of interventions and opportunities for USDA to be helpful, and I really think it's important that the USDA steps in now and is helpful, if the focus was starting with how do we spend the public resources that are available to us in such a way that we lever a change in how things happen out in marketplaces, so that if and when all of a sudden reasonably Congress is focused on starting to reduce government debt, and we pull the government funding that we have when we had the funding in place, levered a whole new market. So the market takes over when our money's gone. There is too much of a history, and this is not just about USDA, it's about every ag department in every developed nation country that I can think of. It's too often the case that the initiative ends up being an initiative where if the funding for that initiative goes away, the market crashes. So we have to make sure that the spending is creating a market that can survive after the funding goes away. And there's the list of opportunities to get things right, with that being the first test, is good. So let's get focused on that. How are we spending public dollars to create a market that takes over and survives when the public dollars aren't there?
Yeah, I definitely echo a lot of what Eldon said. And Ross, I don't think that that's a very basic or simple question. I actually think that's a very complicated, multifaceted question. It's the idea of, how do we know which policy levers to pull? How do we know which policy mechanisms are actually going to work? who is going to be interested in one piece versus the other. And the answer to that is, it sounds like it's straightforward, but everything that you introduce, there are folks that are for it and there are folks that are against it. And so what we end up having to do is try to navigate which of these mechanisms are we going to be able to get the most support with? How are we going to be able to ultimately, in Carbon 180's case at least, ultimately scale up carbon removal and help address climate change, but in the process, ensuring that we're getting the champions that we need and figuring out what their priorities are versus how we think we're best able to address it. So something like crop insurance, federal crop insurance, I mean, we have talked about, making changes and adjustments to help farmers who are trying to implement, soil health practices or trying to step outside of, your traditional, conventional agricultural practices to more regenerative. And it sounds like an easy fix. It sounds like something that's straightforward, but it's really not. And it takes a lot of conversations, a lot of explaining, a lot of negotiating. And sometimes, no matter how hard you try or what information you bring forward, there are just folks that are not interested. And that's the reality of working on federal policy is maneuvering these different interests and these different ideas that folks have.
So Tito, are you just glad to be in the jewelry business, consumer products business right now? You don't have to deal with all of that?
Really. I for me, I go to, how can people from the air miners community get involved in this, or individual people who are kind of in a way like looking at this from the outside, saying like, wow, this is really interesting, powerful stuff. Does anybody have any suggestions for where people should get connected if they want to follow up on this?
Yeah, I think you can try. That's a good question. I guess it depends on where you live because, constituents as individuals have a lot of power. And I think if one of your senators, or when it gets introduced to the House, if one of your members are involved in one way or another, I think reaching out to them and expressing your interest or expressing why you think it's important can really go a long way as an individual, I would say.
Thanks, that's helpful.
And I also want to go from my, I hope not too overly negative sound back to the positive. The thing I love about this bill is it's built in that, as far as I read it, it's built in that window for an advisory committee and the principals to really, spend some time on resources on figuring out how to get the publicly funded solutions right. So while I'm a little bit negative about the suggested solutions that are written into the bill, that window of opportunity to consult widely and get it right is a huge asset in that bill. So there's going to be as much time to discuss and work through what right looks like after the bill is passed into law than there is between now and when the bill is passed into law. And that's a huge positive aspect of the bill that we think is really great.
Yeah, and I think a lot of those findings could also potentially inform, the farm bill that would be coming up in a few years, and be able to, inform some changes, make sure that the research that was done in that period of time can really help address the barriers that may not have been addressed in the last farm bill. So that's also something else that could come out of it.
Could I just add an anecdote? I think if you look back at the 2002 farm bill, it got a lot of stuff related to just what we're talking about really, really right. But then a lot of the initiatives that were initially funded under the 2002 farm bill got defunded before they were completely delivered, or while approved in the bill, didn't get funded at all, didn't get appropriations at all. So the reason I'm so cautious about this is I think you've seen really, really, really good legislation in the past, but getting it legislated didn't mean getting it done. So that's the part we're kind of focused on.
Cool. We're going to move on to this final topic now. I should also say that, or disclaim that we're speaking individually here and not for NORI as an entity or anything quite like that. I'll have to figure out exactly how to do that in the future. But okay, this final item, Ugbata, I'm going to ask you once again to introduce what is happening with the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis.
Yeah, so first off, who is the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis?
A great place to start. Yes.
So there's a number of Democratic members that were grouped together to help pen a report that would create a congressional action plan or a framework for, a clean energy economy and a healthy, resilient, and just America. So we've got about 10 or 12 representatives that were brought together to collect submissions from stakeholders and come out with a whole host of recommendations on how we can reach net zero emissions by 2050. And when I say a whole host, I mean like 500 pages worth of information and recommendations and background. It had it all. And I was really impressed by this document. I think just taking a step back, it covered so much in, I was going to say in a short period, but it's 500 pages, so not really. But it still covered everything that I think is really critical and important in addressing climate change. I think throughout it, it really weaved environmental justice concerns, but it also really heavily relied on science. I mean, they used the IPCC 1.5 report to help, determine their emissions goals and to help guide them. They relied on the National Academies of Sciences to provide them some of the science and the background that they were then able to create some of those recommendations on. And, just to hone in on the carbon removal piece, they covered pretty much every aspect or every type or form of carbon capture that we work on. And that is not a common thing. I think usually there's a focus on reducing emissions, which 100% is absolutely critical and important in addressing climate change. But carbon removal is a bit of an up and coming, or maybe it's almost there type of area of research. And I think having it on full display on the report is a real testament to, growing interest and support in it. So it covered soils, forests, direct air capture, carbon storage, even BECCS. It touched on bioenergy carbon capture storage. Some really big key takeaways. It really pushed for like a really big carbon removal federal RD&D program. And this came out of the NIS's recommendation from their report in 2019, but really pushed for like a cross-sectoral multi-agency program. And I think that's the really important piece. Typically, when we're talking about carbon removal, we're looking at something like the DOE, which houses a lot of those carbon capture programs and where a lot of that research and money comes from, or the USDA when we're talking about things like we were just talking about, like agriculture and forestry. I think it's important that this report really takes a whole of government approach to not only carbon removal, but to climate change. And I have not gone through all 500 pages because it came out yesterday. But some of my first thoughts is that I think, honestly, a job well done. I do want to mention, though, that it's just a report and not to play it down or anything, because, Carbon 180's recommendations were spotted throughout the report, which was really exciting for us to see and really kind of gave us that boost that we wanted. But at the same time, it's just a first step. And I think we need to really make sure that we hold Congress accountable to not only take these recommendations into consideration, but then change them into legislation and bills and actually enact these recommendations.
You saw a bunch of Carbon 180. Were they direct references, or were you like, that looks familiar?
It was both. I mean, at one point, they actually referenced like one of our fact sheets, and I saw that and I got excited because I did Control F Carbon 180 just to see what would come up.
Sure,
why not? But not only that, but yeah, going through it, we kind of split it up throughout our team to figure out, what are some of the key recommendations that are in here. And there was definitely direct references and direct links to recommendations that we put forward, especially like in the agriculture section. A lot of the stuff that you're going to see in our Leading with Soils report were shown throughout, and like, the USDA programs that we're really into, they were calling specifically for funding for them. So I thought it was a good note for us yesterday, and we ended the day on a high note.
Well, that's great. Tito or Alden, do you have any reactions to this?
I'll kick to Tito. I haven't got far enough through the proposed measures to have an opinion that matters to anybody.
I'm happy to chime in and say I'm a kind of Apple F type person, so I look to see what terms come up. Direct air capture came up 17 times, so that's pretty cool. Yeah, and it was great to hear Ugbad's summary of it. I think it's everything from, at least from looking through it from my perspective, there's everything from a prize for direct air capture type R&D at the kind of the exploratory level, as well as the nuanced level of modifying 45Q to, I think, remove the limit or the lower limit in terms of how much carbon dioxide you need to capture in order to qualify for 45Q. I can't remember if it was to lower the limit or just to remove it entirely, but I think in terms of thinking about smaller scale direct air capture, modular direct air capture, that's the type of stuff that just really can open the door to new types of developments and new types of thinking.
Yeah, it eliminated the plant threshold altogether, which is exciting. And then
That's
it
great.
extended the commence construction deadline, and it extended the credit payout period. And then it just, yeah, like you said, it really took not only just a research, investing in research and development, but then it took it all the way through and it really helped, fund investments, incentives, like the whole scope of carbon removal, which I thought was important.
My question is what are you detecting as level of enthusiasm or interest in the initiative?
From like other ENGOs or from the Hill, or?
I'm thinking from the Hill.
That's too early to tell. I can't say off the top of my head right now. I think I'll be interested to tune in and see, and definitely keep you guys posted on as folks are able to actually get through the report and create their own opinions. I can definitely relay that back to you.
Oh, thank you for that.
And by the way that this works too, I always find myself baffled by it. But this report is non-binding, of course, but it's just something that they might build future legislation around. It's a way of informing their peers on the Hill. Is that what this is for?
That's exactly right. Yeah, it's just a roadmap. It's a congressional roadmap, and it's a way to consolidate all of the bills that are out there right now and figure out how they complement with one another, how they could be implemented. Identifying areas of improvement or gaps. And it's really just a way to come up with ideas, but not necessarily, it doesn't direct Congress to do any of this. It just gives them the idea that this is what, stakeholders are interested in, and this is how we can help address the climate crisis.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Well, I think this is running a little bit long, so I think we should wrap it. I think that entire report probably deserves a deeper dive episode all of its own. Maybe that will be something that we'll have to do in the future. Your Twitter handles of all the people here are going to be in the show notes, as well as the organizations such as Nori, Negative, Air Miners, Carbon 180. Anything burning any of you want to say before I sign us off?
Happy July 4th. Be safe.
This is technically Canada Day, as we talked about earlier. Yeah.
Oh, I have one. If the Air Miners community is hosting a kind of matchmaking networking session coming up. So if you want to join that, it's going to be live over Zoom. We're going to match you with a bunch of random people for a short discussion to get to know people that you've heard of and to get to know people that are new. And so if you want to hear more about that, you can check out at conference.airminers.org, and that's coming up in about 2 weeks.
That sounds fun. But do you want to continue the tradition of plugging the Carbon 180 newsletter?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a weekly newsletter that comes out. It's called the Carbon Copy. Every week we put out, articles that we're reading or any of the big news across carbon removal. So if you're interested, please go to our website, carbon180.org, and subscribe and, get in tune. We've always got really funny BCCs at the bottom. So if you're ever interested in some funny Twitter stuff, it's for you.
It's good. It informs a lot of what we cover on this show, actually. So it's a great resource if you're listening. I would definitely recommend signing up and also joining the Air Miners community too. I should be there, Tito. Thanks for lining something like that up.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Cool. If you like the show, please rate and review us on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher. Tell your friends, and thank you so much for listening.